Hello and welcome to Truth versus Hype. When Omar Abdullah proposed a minor reduction in the footprint of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act here in Jammu and Kashmir, it didn't seem like an entirely unreasonable demand. The Kashmir of today is vastly different from the Jammu and Kashmir of 20 years ago when the act was first enforced, and popular sentiment against it is as strong as ever. But the army reacted vehemently. They said that any decision on the dilution of their powers will only be taken through the prism of hard security and nothing else. That may seem like not entirely a reasonable demand, but it's a polarizing debate, so let's keep it simple. Let us begin with the army's premise that has the security scenario changed here to allow some scaling down of the Armed Forces Act? Has the army in fact become a victim of its own success?
On September 13th this year, a joint team of the Kashmir Police and the Army's Rashtriya Rifles tracked down to this house in the town of Sopore, one of Kashmir's most wanted terrorist leaders. After a brief operation, Abdullah Uni, the chief operational commander of the Lashkar-e-Toiba for the valley, was shot dead. The army would argue that the Uni encounter or any such operation cannot take place without AFSPA, especially key clauses like allowing armed forces to fire upon, even to cause the death of anyone who's contravening the law, to arrest and search without warrants, to destroy any arms dump, fortified position or shelter, and if charged with any violations, then they can only be prosecuted with sanction from the central government. Except Uni's death was one of the biggest successes of a sustained offensive by security forces that has vastly depleted militant ranks in the state. Almost 90 prominent militant commanders have been killed in the past 3 years across the valley, 18 in the first 10 months of this year, bringing down the total militant strength in the state to an estimated 300, a huge drop from the 10,000 during the peak days of the militancy.
With the army on the offensive and militancy on the wane, this is what you see on the streets, and it's matched by these figures which show the dip in violence from the number of civilians killed, 31 down to 20 in the past 3 years, number of security forces 40 down to 15, encounters 117 down to 54. Now these are the figures which have become central to the argument to reduce the footprint of the Armed Forces Act. But senior army commanders who spoke to us told us in confidence that their opposition to the move remains as strong as ever.
He said that hardcore national security cannot be determined by statistics, that Pakistan's intent has not changed, and that Kashmir remains an insecure area.
But the state government says that they only propose to remove AFSPA in just 4 to 5 districts in the entire state. Districts where the army has anyway not been actively involved in fighting insurgency. For example, Srinagar district, Budgam and Gandarbal in the valley, and Jammu and Samba in the Jammu region. In all these other districts, Kupwara, Baramulla, Pulwama, all the other insurgency districts, they say AFSPA will remain. Only these 4 or 5 districts, which despite the absence of the army, have remained largely violence-free.
Including all the civilians and armed forces, Srinagar has only seen 7 deaths in the past year, Budgam only 1, and Gandarbal has seen 2 deaths.
But what the army wants to know is that while they may not have troops fighting militancy in these districts, they do have them stationed in company operating bases like this one. They have about 15 in Budgam, which is about 1,500 troops, and 20 in Gandarbal, which is about 2,000 troops. And what they want to know is that if any of them are attacked, how will they be able to respond without the protection of special powers?
The army's concern, as I said in the beginning, is genuine, definitely, that if you're going to be having a contingency where you want to employ the army on CI operations, you have to give them this act. Without that, they can't operate. That's the basic thing. But we have to take a decision as to that. Do we need, in the next 6 or 8 months or 1 year, do you visualize a contingency where army would be required to be operating in Budgam and Srinagar? I think the answer could generally be assumed to be a no for some time, unless, of course, the unforeseen can happen. But that time, why can't we invoke the act again? There's no problem. If the nation at that point in time feels that there's a need, that things have now gone so badly out of control that we need to have the act again, we can again have them.
NDTV's cricket app, Android and iPhone. Fastest scorecard, special analysis, and much more. Download free. ndtv.com/apps.